Greetings all, BWS2K here. Before we get into the video proper, I did not forget that I had mentioned some Discord stuff in the last video, and I'm going to put links in the description below, or a link in the description below. I was going to make it my own Discord and invite everyone over there, and then I discovered after I had set everything up that there actually is a Discord server that is relatively new for Marvel Heroic. So the link in the description is actually going to be for that. And you'll see some familiar faces there, but also plenty of new faces. And there's lots of things, lots of possibilities in that Discord for play-by-post, but also coordinating. And folks are pretty responsive there. And so I'll put that link in, and rather than reinvent the wheel, so to speak, we'll just use and boost the community that already exists, the community space anyway. So that link's going to be in the description. And as far as Roll20 stuff, I haven't really got that off the ground yet. I spend a lot of time starting projects, and then I spend a lot of time starting new projects. so that stuff doesn't really always, sometimes it takes a while, right? But I wanted to mention that before we get into the video proper. And then sort of as a segue off of that last point, I feel like I start most of my videos with, we're going to do something different this time. But, and it's always true. I'm having trouble, me personally, with getting into gaming lately, current events being what they are. I find that my muse, my creative outlet is stymied when it's hard to play pretend about heroes and villains when there's so much of that going on in real life. And so that has always been true of me. I tend to flake out of games and get overwhelmed pretty easily. In the past, it's been either a illness, health stuff, or a move, job change, things like that. And this time it's pretty obviously, I have identified for myself that it's pretty obviously just what's going on right now in the States. And so I'm trying a different tact. Yesterday, I went looking in my basement for the comic that we're going to be covering here in a moment, because I know I own it. But rather than throw my back out going through, I don't know, dozens of 20-gallon tubs of things that are in our basement, I was able to find the panels, the pages online, and that's what we'll be looking at today. I do own this comic, and someday I will find it and I will show it to you on camera, but I figured the internet wouldn't mind, and the Ghost of Stan Lee wouldn't mind if I if I took the images offline, and that's what we're looking through today. And they're probably crisper than the newsprint from when I was in the 6th grade anyway. Of course, you won't get the really cool advertisements or the was it Fleet, whatever the trading cards, because I had the trading cards were in the comic as well. So this video is kind of coming out of a time when, or really that I'm still in, of just not being able to find a handle on how to get back into the hobbies that I love. And I realized this happens a lot when I make characters, but doubly so when it comes to telling stories. I learned a lot about myself in the process. And so I've made characters before, and then I'm like, oh, I just learned some things about myself through that process that I would not have otherwise perhaps realized. And so stories, I have realized in the last few days, maybe it's more appropriate to say I've always known this, but I have been able to articulate it better, that stories have always been a big piece of me and how I relate to the world around me. And I do have an idea for a second video. I want to kind of be a little bit more expansive and share a little bit more about that process in my life growing up. But this picture, of course, if you've watched the earlier videos in the channel, this is my poster of Scott. And behind him are panels from the X-Men comics. And this was a gift that when my brother and I started getting into X-Men, I was in I think it was the 6th grade, 6th grade. This is sort of near the beginning. I wouldn't say it's the very beginning, but it is very near the beginning, within, a few months of my interest in Marvel, and specifically the X-Men, that widely, or not widely, but the vast majority of my Marvel reading has been for X-Men. So I figured this would make a good panel for a couple reasons to start with, both just as not getting into the issue for some housekeeping, but also because there's some really cool stuff that happens in this. And I don't have a script to read through. Obviously, we're going to be going through a comic, so there is a script in that sense, but I'm going to be riffing and commenting and kind of going through memory lane. I remember reading this comic on the carpet, my blue carpet in my bedroom when, like I say, I was in the 6th grade. And I think it was Christmas, I think, because I got this comic here. We can advance to the next page so we know what we're talking about. It's this issue right here, Uncanny X-Men 310. I was reading this, and my brother, this was in my stocking, and my brother had an issue where Jean and Scott were heading off to their honeymoon and got captured by Mr. Sinister and what does he call his group? The Rowdy Boys or whatever. Loud Boys? Wild Boys? Maybe it's the Wild Boys. I don't remember. Whatever. The stretchy guy, the big, the purple stretchy guy, and the knockoff Wolverine and stuff. So my only exposure to X-Men really at that point, our only exposure pretty much was the animated series. So these characters many of them are characters that we knew, like in a very vague sense, but we had no comic context for them. And so these comics were like, this was the serious X-Men. All right, this wasn't the cartoon. Okay, if you're gonna be serious about X-Men, this is what's really going on in the X-Men stories. But we didn't like collect X-Men comics. I don't have 311 or 312. I didn't have 309. It was just my grandparents saw the comics and put them in our Christmas stockings, and here we are talking about them 30 years later or whatever. So let's get into it. X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 310. It's called. Well, you have this wonderful cover. You've got Scott and Cable both blasting X-Cutioner, who I'm going to call the X-Cutioner probably more often than not in this video. We open with a really interesting, not screen, but panel. It's a full-page panel. It's Scott and Banshee. And I'm going to read what we're seeing, but I'm not that great at accents, so you'll forgive that, I hope. And of course it's Scott and or Sean, and he's got that really thick accent, right? So he says, and isn't this just the way oh, you know what? I'm just realizing. I thought, so we have these and I thought that was him making his noise so that he could fly, because he looks like he's flying. But maybe it's the alarms, because that's literally what they're talking about. And I'm just now reading that. Because he goes, and isn't this just the way it always is? We've one foot out the door, off to meet the others at your bachelor party, only to have the bleatin' danger room intruder alarm start wailing away. And then we see the So I bet that's supposed to be alarm. Okay, all right, well, you learn things. And so Scott replies, you know as well as I do, Sean, this is one of the most secured areas of the mansion. It is, technically, virtually impregnable, which means, Banshee, if someone has come calling on the X-Men, we have to be prepared for anything, right? And it's just such a dynamic panel, them sort of bursting through the door. I know there are critics of this artwork, and I might count myself among them if it wasn't for just the absolute unabashed nostalgia lens through which I'm seeing these things. And so we have the bubbles, or not the bubbles, but the boxes. Anything, Scott Summers? As a mutant born with the genetic ability to fire powerful yet uncontrollable optic blasts from your eyes, your personal experience with anything has encompassed, it seems, everything, up to and including hordes of rampaging evil mutants, platoons of pan-galactic invaders, and alternative reality clones of your future self. So, while yes, you've encountered much since the day you became the first X-Man, are you man enough? Are you brave enough to confront your past? Ooh, okay. Another really awesome composition here. Specifically, that night on Earth's moon, when you were called upon to sacrifice your only begotten son, Nathan Christopher Summers. Although this is a memory you've relived in your heart 1,000 times, you're nonetheless overcome by a sense of violation at seeing this most intimate of moments displayed utilizing the Danger Room's holographic technology. So what we're watching is a hologram, and you can see in the bottom of the panel the two heads of the two characters that have just come in. So in the hologram, it's Scott in his sort of older costume. When he's cured, you'll bring him back? And this Unknown person says, no. The energies required to establish and maintain such a portal are beyond the capability of all save one, and I am she. If you and he embrace this path of destiny, Cyclops, he will be lost to you forever. And then they did this interesting thing, or I say interesting as a cover, it's a mistake that they're making. We read Sean saying, lad, is this how it happened? And Scott replies, heaven help me. Yes, this is exactly what happened. But I am 1,000% sure that these word bubbles are pointing to the wrong people. This is Sean. This is Scott. And we know this because of the colors of their jackets and the colors of their hair. So, and that happens actually a couple times throughout. I'm not going to call it out every time, but it's there. And then the boxes. So Scott is saying this is exactly what happened, and the boxes say maybe not exactly. True, the Shi'ar technology that manages to bend light and sound with near impossible results creates a holographic display capable of transporting you back into the past. There is so much more that it is incapable of relating. A portrait of agony without the agony. For this is the moment of your greatest disappointment, the failure of the primary responsibility to your son. And then we have the credits here, and the title of this story is Show Me the Way to Go Home. And I talked about this a little bit in the Marrow comics when I was reviewing them, but there's just some really awesome things that happen in this era of writing. So we're talking about going to the past. Like this creates a holographic display capable of transporting you back into the past. And the idea of the past and traveling and through time and growing is just, it's a theme, or maybe more accurately, it's a motif in this story that they really actually hit a couple different ways as we go through, and you'll see them too, and I'll call out some of them, but it's just a really interesting way of starting a story. You have characters bursting into a door, like coming out at us, right? And then, so like this is page one, but this would be on the right as we're opening it, right? The cover would be over on the left. So then we open it up and there's a double page spread, and now we're behind them and they're looking at something else that's happening. It's almost like a story within a story, right? Right as they kick off this narrative, and it's called "Show Me the Way to Go Home." Now, that is, it's written in quotes with the what's it called with the dots? Ellipsis, right? I think it's a lyric to a sort of whimsical song that you would sing. It's "Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed." And it's kind of like the bar is closing and you've had a rough day and maybe you're a little bit tipsy and you just, you need help getting home, right? But the sort of B plot that happens here is in a bar. And so it's just really cool when you can see that there's some intent, some thought, some purpose to orchestrating the narrative like that. And I love that. And like I said, it happens. I even called it out in the Marrow comics, some of the Marrow comics, that sort of double meaning is just so cool. I just really appreciate that, how a story is crafted, not just like presented. Okay. So Scott lifts up his glasses and we read Zakt, Z-A-K-T, of course, onomatopoeia is great. Computer, abort sequence, now, he shouts, right? In the box, your voice is ragged with pain, and you let that pain show, a rarity in your life. And we see the hologram, or the danger room is saying, sequence termination not within program parameters. Non-training scenarios necessitate manual override on any... So he's like blasting it and telling it to turn off. And this comic, this story, the boxes anyway, are addressed to Scott. So like we are sort of experiencing this story through his eyes. And so the danger room is like, that doesn't work. You can't do that. You got to do manual override. So he hits the button with his optic blast. Fine. One way or another, I want this hologram shut down. And then we read, so it might have been a bit of overkill. It might have been just as easy to walk across the room and turn it off, but it feels good to lash out. Good, yet hollow. And then we have dialogue. 1 minute, we're knee deep in the past. The next, we're standing in the center of an empty room. You ever get the feeling our lives get a wee bit more complicated than they need to be? And that's Banshee speaking, right? He means it as a joke, but you've never been a big fan of humor as coping mechanism, have you? And Scott asks, computer, who activated this particular program? And someone off screen says, that would have been me. And I love so much this depiction of Cable for so many reasons, not the least of which is he is out of frame up here and out of frame here. If you want to show that a character is larger than life, is like making a show on the scene, having them literally break the narrative borders or the visual borders of the story that's being crafted is such a cool way of doing that. Like he even crowds into the other panels. It's just so great. Like he's just such a big, and even our view is sort of like it's not exactly directly at him, it's a little bit sort of down, like we're looking up at him. Like it's just such a powerful depiction of him that speaks so many volume, or so much volume, before we even know anything else what's going on, right? But he continues. So he said, that would have been me, your prodigal son, several centuries removed. More jokes, as if making light of tragedy somehow makes that tragedy easier to bear, but it does not. And Cable continues, I realize you people were on your way out the door, but I was hoping you could spare a moment, Cyclops, to talk. He calls him Cyclops, not Scott, not Dad, right? In the boxes, you've only seen this man half a dozen times in your life, or a half dozen times in your life. As always, his is a presence that cannot be denied, but you can tell immediately that there's something different about him. The fact he is wearing no weapons. He's come in peace. And I one of the other reasons I like it so much is, again, this is one of my first ever X-Men stories and depiction of these characters, and Cable, for all of the very purposeful, like leaning into weapons, huge explosions and everything. One of my first depictions of Cable, or introductions to Cable, is that he is capable of not being that. And I don't know, I like it. Like these pads should have like ammo clips and grenades and a battle, combat knife and different things like that. But he's not. He's coming in peace, right? And Sean gets upset at him and says, after all the corrupting you've done to me, daughter, in recent weeks, I'll gladly talk to ye with me fists. Banshee's about to go off, but Scott stops him. Banshee, don't. Sean, please, go on to the party without me. I'll be along as soon as I can. And just, again, I don't want to harp. Some of this stuff is intentional. Some of it may not be intentional, but when you're in that mode of writing and crafting, it's some things you don't mean to be, consciously still happen. And it's such great writing. He calls his dad Cyclops, right? And he calls him Banshee, right? Because he's like the leader and he's like commanding in a sense, right? But then Sean, please, like he meets him again on that personal level. Like there's this toggle of like going from battle mode to personal mode. I just think it's cool. And so he tells him to go to the party without him. He'll be along as soon as he can. And he says, this is personal. And Cable echoes, that's one way of putting it. You realize you should admonish him for breaching mansion security, no doubt having body slided, as he calls teleportation, his way inside. But for this moment, you're more than leader of the X-Men. You're a man. You're a father. Did I miss a piece? Oh, there's a period. Yeah, you're a man. You're a father. Sorry. Dramatic moment. So we opened with people coming through a doorway. Now we're going to enter through this doorway. This is a bar in Greenwich Village. Unbelievable. We can count on the guy to lead us into the shadow of the Valley of Death and back. But when we need him most, he manages to muck up his own send-off. And that's Iceman, Bobby Drake. That's our Scott, Robert, a study in contradictions. And that's Beast. Personally, Hank, I take it as a good sign. That's Warren, right? Mr. Summers gets cold feet at the last minute, and suddenly Jean Grey has one last chance to become Mrs. Warren Worthington III. And Nightcrawler chimes in, ever the eternal optimist, mein Freund. Ever, Kurt, says Warren. But then, of course, Bishop is there. I'm not going to try the Bishop accent, but I love it so much when he talks about the future. Pardon me for being dense, but I was hoping one of you could explain something to me. And Hank says, the floor is yours, Bishop. I'm a little unclear on what this bachelor party thing is all about. As you know, I was raised some 75 years in the future. Oh, I hadn't heard, says Hank. Well, marriage was discouraged by the XSE, the rationale being one should dedicate one's life to one's work. And then Nightcrawler sort of has this whisper aside to Warren, tell me, does he go on like this all the time? And Warren sighs, afraid so. As far as, this is Bishop continuing, as far as I can tell, the closest correlation to a bachelor party would have been the passing. It is, of course, only an approximation. The two events have as many dissimilarities as they do similarities. In the future, when, and whap, Bobby puts his hand over Bishop's mouth. So help me if I hear one more word about the future. You don't live in the future, B. You live here and now. Let it go. It's getting tired, dude. Beast goes, what Bobby is saying, Bishop, is there's no future in the past. Even if in your case, the past has yet to come. And Kurt goes, I think I'm getting a headache. And Warren says, I think I have a pretty good idea why Scott is late. But our box says, unlikely. And here we are again, door bringing us in. The boxes. You discovered recently something you had long ago suspected, that this man before you is your son. And while you'd never admit it to yourself, any more than would he, you both hope in your heart of hearts that today might begin the healing. That somehow words alone might bridge the gap between the centuries. That, for this moment at least, conflict might give way to compassion. But over here in the corner of the panel, we read, and I'm in. But it's just a thought bubble. So we know that the conflict giving way, no, we've gone on a nice little journey across the panel, and we know that's unlikely to happen. And here is our titular X-Cutioner. And he continues to think to himself, by monitoring Cable's body slides, I was able to piggyback the signal right through to the heart of Mons Xavier. Or I guess you wouldn't even pronounce it. It'd be like Mons Xavier, Xavier's mansion in French. The fact that the entire building isn't exploding with alarms is the best indication I have that the Sidri cloaking device is functioning, which is just as well, considering how much of a problem a trio of X-Men caused when I targeted Mastermind for execution. So of all of the X-Men figures that I ever owned, because we did have, let's see, I think my brother had Colossus, I had Beast, he had Magneto, I feel like I had somebody else. We had like a Weapon X at some point, like Logan, but with his with the helmet and all the wires and stuff. But I had X-Cutioner. In fact, actually, hasn't he been in my videos? I think he's been in my videos. I think I showed him in one of my videos. Yeah, because and Cable was the other guy I had. Yeah. So anyway, having like context for these characters just being this issue, like imagine you didn't know anything about the MCU, you didn't know, like if you were a complete Marvel newbie, and then like in the first 2 or 3 months, you had bits and pieces of the animated series because you weren't sure exactly what time you were supposed to be watching it the first time, and then this comic and the other one with Scott and Jean getting taken by Mr. Sinister. Like what an odd point to enter this like eternal narrative. Anyway, all right. X-Cutioner continues. I don't want to imagine the risk involved in padding about their headquarters searching for one mutant in particular. Maybe it's time I faced the very real possibility that I possess a death wish. Again, what do you expect from a man who has appointed himself the X-Cutioner? We're back to Scott and Nathan. And Cable says, I got the invitation to the wedding. So tell me, what do you have in mind? You were maybe expecting me to carry the rings? I came to say, if you're so eager to make amends for dumping your only son some 2,000 years into the future, you're going to have to start small. Maybe a baseball game. A stroll in the park. And I think I mentioned it in the Marrow comics. The X-Men do love their baseball games. But Scott counters back, I hardly dumped you, Nathan. Letting go of you was the most difficult decision I'd ever made in my life. I was your father, and that meant doing anything in order to save you from the techno-organic virus that was destroying you, anything up to and including losing you to Ascani, who apparently kept her word. Save it, Dad, says Cable. We both saw the holographic simulation. You made the choice as dispassionately as every other command you've ever given in your life. You're the consummate leader, always going with your first best instinct and never looking back. Never once questioning your decision or the impact it would have on the life of someone the impact it would have had on my life. Scott counters back, is that what you think? Do you honestly believe a day has passed that I haven't wondered if I'd done right by you? You didn't, Cable again. You didn't look all that shaken up in the hololog. Now Scott talks to the computer that he hated 5 seconds ago. Computer. Running. Open personal log. Summers entry. Summers entry Nathan Christopher. acknowledged, accessing. So there's a really interesting thing that's happening in this panel, or in this page. This is how we started this little, I don't know if you want to call it an act, but this little piece. We have box, 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 and then it's thoughts, dialogue. There's no exposition boxes. So this is like the moment now. There's not backstory, or rather the stuff that we're being presented, this information that we're being presented is personal, right? That's what he said it was going to be. And so this isn't Cyclops thinking, this is Cyclops acting and reacting and dialoguing. And I love that this panel has Cable reflected in Cyclops's glasses. Like you already kind of know where this is going. But he's having the computer pull up a personal log. But we bounce back to New York, to Greenwich Village, and it's Warren, and he's thinking, from wedding vows. Anyone here who can show just cause why this man and woman should not unite in the holy bonds of matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. And now he's kind of like muttering, just cause, just cause. And then he's thinking, does unrequited love fall under the legal definition of just cause? Oh, who are you kidding, Warren? No one could be happier for Jean and Scott than... And then Gambit kind of shows up at the bar. He was playing pool in the back, in the previous panels. So tell me, mes amis, what you think of the professor's decision to allow Sabretooth to live in Dimension? And Warren says, Remy, I don't know what your connection with Creed is all about, but we know because I covered it in my Marrow videos. And to be frank, I don't particularly care. Everybody makes mistakes, Gambit. A skeleton or two in their closet they're not overly proud of. Whatever happened in the past, it's obvious Sabretooth living with us during his treatment is making you nervous. You don't like it, then do something about it. If not, then leave me out of it. And so Gambit kind of walks away, and Warren finishes with, I've been at this too long to buy into all this cloak and dagger divide and conquer nonsense. Then we see Bobby. ID? Are you serious? Talking to someone off camera. Private party or not, I still need to see some ID that says you're over 21. Sure, says Bobby. It's out in the car. Fine, go get it. And Remy pulls up next to Bobby, and he says, the beer'll keep. So tell me, mes amis. So it's the same speech. Remy's kind of digging for probably who would help him in his grudge against Sabretooth. But I don't know. Again, I wasn't a huge comic reader at the time, and I haven't read too much that would suggest that Warren had a crush on Jean, but I guess Jean as a woman in a Marvel comic would have had everybody crushing after her at some point, right? I mean, let's be honest. We can be honest. I'm sure somebody was always going after her. Okay. And then here's another doorway, but we're switching scenes. And we see that Remy is finishing up his question. It's the exact same question. He's asking it to Bobby. What you think of the professor's decision to allow Sabretooth to live at Dimension? And we see sniff, sniff. And here we have Sabretooth all cloaked in shadow and stuff. Very cool. And he goes, it's funny. I recognize Cyclops' scent about 10 feet away from skin, metal, Cable. But who's this? MedLab, ICU. Recognize the Dame, but the other? What do you know, boys and gals? We got us an uninvited guest. Doesn't he have like Vin Diesel Chronicles of Riddick energy right now? It's just like, especially like just the eyes, just off in the dark doing his own thing and somehow aware of everything that's going on in the mansion. I don't know. Okay, next page. So this is a double page. I'll try to zoom in. I can't so much move left and right for whatever reason, but I think we'll manage. So Cable says to Scott, remember Scott's having the computer pull up the log. Cable says, is there a point to Olive? And Scott interrupts him and says, shut up. And then the computer says audio. So this that we're about to witness is another hologram, which again, we're going into this. It's a story within a story. It's a story that happened in the past and so on. It's just really cool. It's just really cool. I recognize and appreciate the intent that goes into crafting these stories. So what we hear is, Scott, please, you're exhausted. You can do this in the morning after you've rested. And then we get a visual. We've all been through a lot in the past 36 hours, and it's Jean. But Scott says, all the more reason I need to update X Factor's files while the details are fresh in my mind. Computer, Continue. With Apocalypse reduced to cinder, we were operating under the misconception we had won. At this point, it was clear that the virus ravaging Nathan Christopher's body would ultimately kill him. It was necessary. I relinquished control over... it was necessary. I relinquished control over the child in order to... Strike that. It was at this point I gave up my... He's really struggling, right? And Jean says, Scott. And he sort of mutters, God forgive me. She says, don't do this to yourself. You can't blame yourself for what happened. You did what you had to in order to... And then finally we see Scott making a Logan face. I'm his father, Jean. When he needed me most, there was nothing I could do to protect him. Every day of my life, I risk everything to save a world full of people who fear and hate us. Ding, ding, said the thing. Yet when it comes to saving my only son, I'm useless. And he's like blasting the wall or the computer or something in the hologram. I should have died before I gave him up. I should have died because it hurts too much to go on without him. It's dramatic, Scott. And we see the optic blast sort of shatter the computer in the hologram over top of a silent Scott and Nathan. But I think it's neat that in the first hologram that Sean and Scott walked into, Scott shut that off by blasting the wall. And this time they're reviewing a hologram and it ends very much the same way with an optic blast hitting a wall. It's just really cool. So Cable says, I wish I could say that makes everything different, better, but I'm sorry. This doesn't change anything. And Scott says, no, I don't imagine it would. But we get interrupted with a hologram of Sabretooth. Holograms are really great for for narrative devices. I remember what is the show? Rick and Morty. There's an ending to a Rick and Morty episode with an answering machine. And it's like, hey, just letting you know, your rental of the answering machine is way overdue, but don't worry, you can just keep it. Nobody ever uses these things anymore except for exposition in TV shows. It's like, I just feel like, what do you need? A hologram projector in the middle of the wall that isn't the hologram projector for the holograms you've already seen? Like, whatever. And he even has one in his cell. Like, come on. Okay, sure. They're all over the place. Why not? Anyway, okay. Hologram Sabretooth says, Cyclops, just thought you'd want to know you got company. And of course, Cable is like questioning this. Sabretooth here at the mansion? And Scott says, it's a long story, but Sabretooth keeps going. Better tell it quick then, because right now someone's traipsing around our humble abode. He says our humble abode, right? Because he's there. With enough personal armaments strapped to his body to turn this place into a parking lot. Not that I'd even bring it up if I didn't live here at all. And Scott goes, how could you possibly know this when the mansion's security hasn't alerted us? And Sabretooth says, there are loads and loads of ways to fool computers, One Eye. It ain't possible to hide from old Sabretooth. Ask anybody. And it's such a great... Sabretooth is the worst, okay? Like, don't misunderstand me. He's the worst. But I just love the flex of... he's like in a prison cell, and he's not seeing or hearing. He's smelling. Like, his sense of smell is just so amazing that he knows that it's Cable and Scott talk. Not just that there's like, oh, there's people here. He can like identify them all. Oh, it's just so great. It's such a flex. And Scott says, where's the intruder? And Sabretooth says, med lab, and boys, happy hunting. And then, like, speaking of hunting, right, X-Cutioner's on a hunt, so we like sort of transition to a panel with him. But then we switch back to the bar, and Beast is telling a story or a joke. I don't know what it means in Latin. If you know, you can let us know in the comments. I looked it up. I don't think it means anything, but it's part of a joke. It's just the punchline. And he's laughing in between each of these. He goes, so he says, Atticus ad Indrium, my ear. Get it? Oh, I slay me. And Bobby says, now there's an idea whose time has come. Sean comes into the bar. What timing? I managed to miss Henry McCoy's stand up for an audience of one. Truly me sainted mother's favorite son is blessed. And this is Forge saying, Sean, did you bring Scott with you? But he replies, afraid not. You know that lad. He's nae happy unless he's making one sacrifice or another. Right now he's running a diagnostic check on Cerebro. He said he'll be along shortly. And that I'm supposed to buy the next round. And Bobby says, that's our Mr. Responsible. You gotta love him. I remember once when he didn't think anyone was looking, I saw him relax. Of course, he made me promise never to tell anyone. And now Sean's thinking to himself, ah, now you got me lying to your friends. It's such a great accent. Not your friends, not Y-O-U-R. Y-U-I-R. You're got me lying to your friends. So great. Wherever you are, Scotty, I hope you're doing the right thing. And now we get back. We pick up with X-Cutioner, and he's staring down at Emma Frost. And so he's still thinking to himself, right? Emma Frost, or Frost, Emma Grace, chairman of the board and CEO of Frost International, chairman of the board of trustees and headmistress of the Massachusetts Academy, reputed white queen of the Hellfire Club's inner circle. On paper, she's the perfect woman, an old money, jet-setting heiress, keeping herself occupied by working with tomorrow's movers and shakers. But according to Fred Duncan's FBI files, the dossier that were reassigned to me after his death, she's a mutant with blood on her hands. So Fred Duncan was somebody that Charles knew, like, back in the day. There was her past, of course, but not long ago. She was on hand when nearly a dozen young Hellions were murdered. While she's obviously suffered as a result of that same massacre, both physically as well as emotionally, it's not enough. For the ultimate crime, for failing the children, she must pay the ultimate price. And now he finally speaks. He says, "Goodbye, Miss Frost. I will pray for your soul as surely, as earnestly as I will pray for my own." So he raises his electrified fist, or maybe it's his staff or whatever, and he's about to strike her down as she's just laying defenseless in the bed. And then we're back to the boxes. Lots of dialogue, but now we're back to the boxes. There have been many other X-Men over the years who might have begun this confrontation with some cryptic warning, perhaps a witty opening statement of intent. But that's not your way, is it, Cyclops? When you use the awesome power of your optic blasts against another living being, even one with this X-Cutioner's penchants for seemingly random acts of death and violence against your people, you are more than content to let your actions speak for themselves. And so X-Cutioner is sort of struggling to breathe. Scott Summers, I presume? And then we have dialogue. Far be it from me to tell anyone how to run the X-Men, but when the bad guys start showing up in the middle of the night, carrying on like everyone's on a first-name basis, I think it's time you seriously consider changing the locks on the front door. Such a great... So this is a double-page spread again, and it's so great. It's such a great visual, and they're working together. Like, he calls him Cable, because they're like, it's the team mode, right? It's battle mode. He doesn't call him Nathan, even though he was just calling him Nathan, right? Okay, so he says, change the locks on the front door, and Scott says, I'll take that under advisement, Cable. And we're back to the boxes. How odd it feels to be charging into battle with a son, with your son, old enough to be your father. Yes, odd, but vaguely familiar. A familiarity that comes, no doubt, through the realization that this is how it should be. That all the sacrifices, all the soul-searching, the second guesses and what-ifs have led to this moment. A moment when the first X-Man, and arguably the last, are joined together in battle against a common enemy. Whether you stand or fall, win or lose this particular confrontation, you realize you're entering into it as something more than mere comrades, but as father and son, as family. And this is my most favorite exposition box in any comic I have ever read. It's up there with the visual of Marrow being thrown, right? And suddenly you start feeling very badly for the X-Cutioner. I think part of what I like so much about that, how that last box, is just this idea that this is, when we think of the X-Men, when we think of heroes, when we think of superheroes and super battles and stuff, it's often the bombastic, I'm going to say the word violence here, and I think you understand what I mean. It's about the big show, right? But like, what makes this moment powerful isn't powers. In fact, you have one guy who can shoot optic blasts out of his face, and that's it. And you have another guy who has explicitly been described as showing up unarmed. Of course, we're going to find out in a second that he's not ever really totally unarmed. But it's this idea that, and Scott's not in his uniform. Like, what makes this powerful moment, what makes the gravitas of this moment, is that they are fighting as father and son. They don't play catch. They're not going to go out for a hike. This is what they both do best, right? And so I love it. So Cable jumps up. He says, "Allow me." And Scott says, "Certainly. In a very short amount of time, X, you've been one busy mutant hunter. Executing Tower in Central America, taking a stab at Mastermind in Scotland, and now the White Queen right here in Westchester. For a new kid, you seem to get around." And he says to Cable, "To be honest, Cable, always, I couldn't have done it without you." And then we have the word shunt as he kind of glows and begins to body slide. "What? You're body sliding?" "Piggybacking, actually. Anywhere you go, Cable, I have the option of following." And then Scott says, "Just one of the many influences, technological and otherwise, from early model Sentinel to current Shi'ar technology that you've somehow managed to incorporate into your self-anointed quest?" Sort of a rhetorical question. And then Cable just slams this, whatever it is, computer bank, something, scrunch, right on top of X-Cutioner. "Fine, we can catalog his inventory after he regains consciousness in a month or two." "Cable, since when are you this strong?" "You want the real answer or the flippant one?" "Real." "You're in luck. It's the same answer. When I have to be, Cyclops. When I have to be." And Cable is still calling him Cyclops, but it's such a father-son moment when the father realizes that like the son has grown up, isn't just a kid anymore. I kind of like that sort of subtext. But Scott rushes over to Emma. "Cover me, Cable. While most of Emma's injuries are psionic in nature, the damage to her body has required constant monitoring. If that's interrupted..." And then Cable says, "She'd die, I suppose." "And? Isn't this the same woman who tried to kill the X-Men on more than one occasion?" And X-Cutioner butts in and says, "Precisely. More than reason enough to die at the hands of..." And he doesn't get to finish his sentence. Cable says, "Quite the resilient type, aren't you?" But they're both blasting. Cable has a laser in his robot arm, in his techno-organic cybernetic arm. And Scott pulls off his glasses, and so we have zacked and badoom hitting the X-Cutioner right in the chest. "You strike as one, and just as you predicted, the X-Cutioner never stood a chance." But Cable says, "5 will get you 10. He teleports out of here before we get a chance to put him down for good." Scott says, "You're on." But he's already like pulsing and shunting away. Cable says, "What'd I tell you? You owe me 10. And so X-Cutioner gets out of there. Cable brings a conversation back again with this woman. "Tell me, Scott, why do I get the impression that even if this X-Cutioner guy had stayed, if he were hurt, you'd be looking after him too?" And Scott says, "The day we stop showing compassion for our enemy, Nathan, is the day we become the enemy." And Cable says, "The day we... where have I heard that before?" Scott says, "I wouldn't know. Look, about what we were saying before." And Cable picks up the sentence. Now they're finishing each other's sentences. "That was before," he says. "Fact, my whole life, past, present, and future, was before. During most of that time, I resented the thought of you not being the person I imagined you'd be when I was a kid. Turns out, you've been that person all along. A person I'm proud to know, and prouder still to be able to call you my father." So just as he surprised Scott with his strength just in a few panels ago, now Cable is admitting he's taking a measure of his dad and seeing that his dad isn't the deadbeat dad he was thinking he was. And that's just cool. It's cool to see. But we're getting near the end. And so Cable continues. He explains, "For the record, I never hated you. All I ever wanted was to know that you were angry, half as hurt as I was that we were separated at birth. I guess, like any other son, I wanted to think you missed me." And Scott says, "I missed you every day of my life, Nathan, and every day of yours. I would have done anything to have been able to step across time to hold you in my arms, to protect you, to teach you the things a father is supposed to teach his son." And Cable says, "For what it's worth, there was someone like that. A couple, actually, whose names I can't even remember. And though I'll admit I wished it was you, I want you to know I wasn't always alone." Now, I don't know if they knew this at the time, the writers. I don't know if sometimes it's serial storytelling, so sometimes they might do things like that, and then later they'd be like, these were the people. But I am fairly certain I remember reading when I was doing the research for Marrow that there is a story where the people who are raising him in the future, kind of like in Days of Future Past, where the mind of Kitty goes into her future self, there's sort of this transference where the two people who are sort of Cable's surrogate parents, Scott and Jean, actually step into their role. So he says the people that Cable is referring to here, I wonder, because I don't remember when that comic was, but it would have been around this time. There is a sense in which Scott and Jean actually did get to partake a little bit in Nathan's upbringing, though it's not made abundantly clear here. I'm wondering just kind of if that's what that's partially in reference to. But anyway, Scott goes, the last thing the Uncanny said to me, do you remember her words? If you and he embrace this path of destiny, he will be lost to you forever. I'm glad she was wrong. And we see in the reflection of his ruby quartz glasses, Cable is beginning to body slide away, as is already kind of shown here. Scott says, I'm glad she was wrong. And Cable says, look, we could do all this male bonding, drum beating, huggy feely stuff all night, but I got a life to get back to, and you're late for your only bachelor party. I'm body sliding out of here. Can I drop you anywhere? So then, even though it's not a door, right? But it's not a person. It's almost like a portal. So like they keep doing these transitions, and I just like that they visually are doing it like doors, portals, right? Anyway, a blinding flash of light, a momentary feeling of disembodiment, and you suddenly find yourself in the strangest place of all, among friends, which would be strange. Scott struggles with social dynamics. I think I've talked about it before on the channel, but his mutant power is pushing people away, and I love that that's reflected in his social interactions. And so he's body sliding in. And he says, "Hey everyone, are we late?" And Bobby says, "We, oh fearless leader, you didn't art ski on the Ibruski. It's Pig Latin, right? Without us, did you, Scott?" He's saying, "Did you not? You didn't start drinking." And Scott says, "Did I say we? I guess I was wrong." And he looks back, and Cable has gone somewhere else. He didn't bring himself to the bar. But now we hear from, I think that's what's his name? Guido. What's his strong guy? I think that's him, because he is there. You saw him in like one of the first panels. Anyway, he says, "Great. Now the guest of honor is here. Let's chow." And we read the boxes. We close with the boxes. You feel it in your heart before you feel the crumpled paper in your hand. He must have handed it to you during transit, and it's an invitation for the wedding. But it's scrawled at the bottom. It says, "I'll be there." More than just an acknowledgement that he'll be joining you on your wedding day. So it's kind of like, I'll be there as your son, but like, I'll have your back, Dad. You know, it's just that kind of thing. It's an affirmation that the day will be fraught with promise of a better life, not only between man and wife, but perhaps between father and son as well. And then it ends with Scott in a rare show of affection. He's smiling. And the story closes out. And I don't know that this, like, it doesn't really feel particularly satisfying. I don't even think this last panel was necessary. I would rather have had this invitation be that last panel, you know? And you could stretch it across and still include the same exposition. But I don't think we need to see Scott's face. I think the final beat of this story should be that paper. But either way, I wanted to share that with you, and I think we'll get back to the cover as we just kind of wrap up here. I wanted to share that to you because it's an important story to me as an introduction to the X-Men. Oh, look at that. He's in his costume in this cover. Scott is, but he's not in his uniform. He's in his metaphorical uniform in the issue. But I wanted to share it because it really means a lot to me. And I really treasure the story of the X-Men, of a story where the leader of the X-Men is showing the strength of his character and how his leadership, I guess you would say, and who he is as a person is more than just his mutant power. And the same goes for Cable. And I would say even more than that, more important than their mutant power is the ability of the X-Men to develop those relationships, be a family, be a found family. And we see it even with like Warren sort of crushing on Jean there, and he's like, oh, who am I kidding? You know, I want nothing more than for them to be together. There's this sense of teamwork that or family that is like that's their real strength, is that they're willing to do this stuff. And I think that's why, even though Sabretooth is in this, Sabretooth is helping. Remy comes off almost as the bad guy because he's almost like trying to put a wedge in the team, and he's just going around basically trying to stir up some drama and get to the bottom of what's going on with Sabretooth. Of course, we know it's because they have a past, right? So it's just a really great issue. I wanted to share it with you. I haven't done it in a video in a while and kind of wanted to reach out. And if you have any questions, comments, throw them in the comments section. If you have any ideas for future videos, I do have an idea about something I want to do next. I have no idea about the timeline on that. Do check out the link to the Discord in the comments section and mingle with some like-minded folks if you're at all interested in Marvel Heroic. It's kind of slow in terms of gaming there. In fact, I tried to start a game, and a little over a week ago, I kind of just paused the whole thing for the reasons that I had cited. It's hard. It's hard for everybody right now. And I spent a long time trying to kind of like get through that funk and sort of, you know, kind of go back and you remember the things that made you happy in the beginning, so to speak, right? And I was like, oh man, that was a great comic. And of course I have all of these modern comics like on my shelf, you know, cool stories to go through. But this is one that meant a lot to me. And I think it's because it was my first comic and certainly my first introduction to the X-Men. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you like this kind of thing, sort of read-alongs, read-alouds. I'm happy to keep doing it. And if you have suggestions on stories to go through, or if you just want me to keep going through my favorite stuff, that's cool too. Let me know. Let's see, anything else? No, I mentioned the Discord. We did the read through, and yeah, so I'm good. So again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Excelsior.